Right, hi everyone. Welcome to our very first webinar of the year 2022. We are so glad to have you join us this evening. I am Jessie, Marketing and Sales Executive of Heritance Digital. For those who are new to us, we are a digital company with the mission of impacting generations through better values and wealth inheritance. Heritance Digital is an app for everyone who loves their families to learn, plan, and pass down values and valuables to their loved ones, all on their mobile devices. We are also the very first in Asia to bring on the professional service to the hands of the consumer on a digital platform. Before we dive right in, we want to touch a bit more on today's webinar topic, the 3 common traps of estate planning. Also, if you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box and we will address your queries at the end of the webinar in the Q&A session.
Estate planning, also known as inheritance planning, is getting prevalent these days, especially after the pandemic, whereby individuals are forced to confront the potential of their very own mortality. Just last year alone, as COVID Delta variant's fatality gripped the nation, we noted double the number of inquiries asking us about our wills and trust services. Several of these inquiries actually came from as far as Indonesia and beyond, and they ask how can they start up their trust in Singapore without flying over. However, inheritance planning shouldn't be acted upon only at such times, crisis time. At Heritance, we believe that inheritance planning is a lifestyle, actually, an ongoing process, something that you start today and you build on it along the way. Therefore, the content of today's webinar, we call it the 3 common traps of estate planning, is especially apt and specially curated for you to empower your very own successful values and wealth inheritance.
Yes, that's right, Derek. Thank you for that. For today, our featured speaker is Ms. Kee Siew Poh, a wealth succession specialist with more than 15 years of financial and estate planning experience. We are passing the spotlight to Ms. Kee Siew Poh to share more. So without further ado, Ms. Kee, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jessie. Thank you for the introduction. Wait, let me go back to the earlier slide. Yes, today we're going to talk about the 3 common traps of estate planning. So talking about estate planning, I think something that is important to understand would be what does it mean, to leave behind inheritance, or in some cases to leave behind a heritage. So I just want to ask all of us here, is there really a difference between leaving behind an inheritance or leaving behind a heritage? If you look deeply into it, you will find that by default, almost everyone can leave behind an inheritance. If you don't overspend and you plan properly, you should leave behind an inheritance. However, not everyone can leave behind a heritage. And so you can see from here, right, that inheritance this very much can be a default thing, but heritage is very much by design. And the other thing you can see from here is that inheritance is like this big tree, that I put right in the center. It's almost as good as I chop down this tree and I distribute everything, the branches, the fruits, everything I distribute out, and that's it, the tree dies. But heritage is where this tree lives on, and I'm just distributing the fruits from that tree. And of course, if you look deeper into the intangibles, you will see that inheritance is very much about the valuables we have, but heritage is beyond the valuables. We're talking about values. And that's why it's so important that when we plan to leave behind a heritage, it is very much something that is deep. And I would call deep as deliberate, intentional, and purposeful. And so moving on, you'll see that values are very much like lighthouse. They are signals given us direction, meaning, and purpose. And that's why values is so important. It's not just about the valuables, but the values. For those of us who work, you will know that every company has its own core values. Like, for example, in some companies, what is important is teamwork, respect, openness, honesty. And therefore, as an individual, we should also have our core values. And these are values that define us. And speaking of core values, that reminds me very much of this 80-year-old uncle that I've been working with. And I had the privilege to know him like 20 years ago when he was around 60 years old. And recently I caught up with him and then he was telling me, hey, Kee, you know, I share with you something about my grandson. And he was telling me that, you know, he said, my grandson, recently he couldn't wake up, you know, he's just very bad with time management, couldn't wake up, and he kept taking taxi to school and to some of the classes. The grandson is a teenager. And then he told the grandson, hey, you know, you have to plan your schedule well, plan your time well, so that instead of taking a taxi, you can take bus, you know, then you don't have to waste money on taxi. To which the grandson replied, but my father is rich, what? So why do I need to take, why do I need to take bus when my father can afford me taking a taxi? And this is where the difference in the values is, because for this 80-year-old uncle, he was born in a very, very poor family. He worked very, very hard. And in those days, he told me that he don't even have money to take bus. And so he has to walk 45 minutes each way to school. And after school, he has to work part-time to support himself. It's totally different kind of lifestyle from what his grandson is enjoying right now. And so if you look at this, all these values here, what are some of the values that best define you? You probably find, you know, 2 or 3 that resonate most to you. Just like the 80-year-old uncle, what really defines him is, he summarized it as the 3 Ds: desire, determination, and delayed gratification. And so for today, right, our agenda is we're going to talk about the 3 common legacy planning traps, and we're going to start with one short Q&A. So basically, it's for you to say, is it true or is it false? And I'm going to flash the question here, and you can just think about this. Do you think it's true or do you think it's false? The Singaporeans are among the wealthiest in the world. Do you agree with that? Is it true? Well, I would say yes, the answer is true. And why is that so? I mean, if you look at just HDB alone, 50 years ago, how much is the value of HDB? Probably can get it at 20K, 50K. And if it's 20K, how many children do people have at that point in time? Many families have 5 or even 10 children. If 20K divided by 10, that's just 2,000 each child. Is there really a need to do the planning we're talking about, deliberate, intentional, purposeful? Probably not. But if you look at it today, how much is the HDB worth? I mean, in some cases, it can be worth more than $1 million. And do you know how many $1 million HDB were transacted in the year 2021 alone? That's easily more than 200 units, and it's still increasing this number. And so how many children do people have in many of the families? Probably 2. And if HDB is already 1 mil, landed or condo is easily 2 mil or more. So 2 mil divided by 2 children, that's easily 1 million each. Is there a need to plan and to look deeper into it? And so you can see from here that has been the trend. Property prices is increasing, and that accounts for a large part of Singaporeans' wealth. And it's not just in Singapore, it's a global trend, especially during pandemic. And so coming to these 3 common legacy traps and how to avoid them. So what is the first trap that we're going to talk about? And that is, I don't need a will. You know, my friends, some people say that, yeah, you know, in Singapore, everything is taken care of. I don't really need to do much planning because the government does a lot of things for me. And that includes having some sort of like a, you know, like a default will kind of thing. And this is how it looks like. The Intestate Succession Act, or in short, we call it the ISA. And so there are 2 ways to die. You can die testate or you die intestate. And so there was this 8-year-old boy whose father passed away. And then he went to the court, and then the lawyer asked him, boy, did your father die testate or intestate? And then the boy like scratched his head and he said, my father died in a rubber estate. Yeah, so you know, you have gone through this and you know the technical terms. So if you have a will, then it's said that, oh, you die testate. But if you don't have a will, then you die intestate. And so to most of us here, if we have spouse and we have children, what does the law say? The ISA says that half of it will go to the spouse and the other half to issue, which means children. And some people will say, hey, Kee, this is exactly how I want it to be as well. So isn't it very good that the government has already done all this? So I don't have to do anything. But I just want to point out to you, my friends, a few things that you need to note from here. If indeed this box is your family and you have spouse, you have children, and if you today are not around, half go to your spouse, half go to your children. If you realize your parents are not in a picture, if your parents are old, they may not inherit anything at all. That's one. The second concern I've come across some families, they tell me is that, or rather, more often than not, it's from the wife, and he told me, Kee, if really I pass on first, and then what happens if my husband remarry? And if my husband remarry, will he then take care of our children? And then what happens if, let's say, he has his another family? I mean, he remarry and he has another children, additional children. Then what about my own children? And so that's the other thing some people are concerned of. But what affects many families with minor children is this. Do you know that if you don't have a will, if you die intestate, then what happens is that before you can appoint an administrator to administer your estate, you will have to find two sureties or two guarantors who is able to back up this administrator. And these two guarantors, these two sureties, must have assets as equivalent, if not more than yourself. Is it so easy to find these two persons who may not even be a relative to you? And we have not even talked about the other parts of your assets. Just now we talk about properties, and if you leave behind properties, houses, be it condo or landed, do you think it's a good thing that one house split into two between spouse and children? If you have children, let's say you have 3 children, that means you have 4 persons owning this house. Is that going to be a good idea? Or will it result in what I would call the 3 C's, cause confusion and conflict? And that is why sometimes people say that if you don't do any planning, if you take a very casual approach to estate planning, it might just result in many casualties unknowingly. And so we have spoken enough about the first trap. Now we look at the second trap. And some people will say, hey, Kee, I have a will, so I don't need a trust. The question that we need to ask is that, is it too much, too soon, and too unprepared? Because do you know that if you only have a will in place, you don't have a trust in place, that means that your children at the age of 18, they will get all the insurance proceeds. And at the age of 21, they will have the title deed to the property, and all the other assets will also go to them. And so is this too much and too soon? And is it in the best interest of the child? You kind of think of it, it takes you years of hard work before you accumulate your first million. But for the children, they don't have to lift a finger to work, and they can straight away have millions. And it takes you years of hard work before you can say, okay, I can finally retire. But for the children, for your children, they might be just born to retire. Will this enrich or ruin them? And that is why Warren Buffett said, and I'll just paraphrase, that you want to give them enough to do something or even anything, but you don't want to give them so much that they end up doing nothing. And you don't want them to see everything as an entitlement. You want them to see that it is a privilege, not that entitlement. And so is a will alone sufficient? Because if you only have a will, then everything that is given will have to be given in one lump sum, and it has to be given immediately as well. And if you want to have a way to delay or even stagger the gifting, then you will need more than a will. You will need a trust, some form of trust incorporated. And why do I put this tree right in the center here? This is to remind us that, as you can see from this tree, a tree takes time to grow roots. In the same manner, a child takes time to grow in values. And so what do I mean, by allowing that child time? You can see from here that as the child increases in maturity and also in financial maturity, you can then start to give the periodic payout. And you can also put conditions that is attached to it, such that the money is used for specific purpose and not for anything. And so this is why we say that in some families where you have too young or too financially immature children, for example, you might just need a trust, because a will alone is not going to be very helpful for you, because you want to find a way to delay and to stagger the gifting. Remember, I shared with you earlier of the 80-year-old uncle, and then he told me that, hey, you know, Kee, before I come to where I am today, to be doing this trust and everything, do you know that I've gone through a lot of struggle in my early years? And then slowly, from that struggle, it becomes stable. And then I become successful, and I think of significance now. And that's why I do all this trust. So he went through that 3S, struggle, stable, success. And then now he's planning for his significance. Yeah, but then he's very worried, because when he looked at his grandson, he is very concerned that the grandson, instead of, that 3Ds I mentioned earlier, that desire, determination, and delayed gratification, he's very concerned that his grandson might just be, having the 3Is, impatient, impulsive, and immediate gratification, and that he might just belong to that me generation, the overly indulgent and overly pampering on themselves, and not thinking of not thinking much about other things. And so this is why he is so concerned, and he said, I better get a trust done to ensure that whatever gifting I have to him will be staggered and not giving to him in one lump sum. And some people might just say, hey, like that, yeah, might as well just don't give them anything. But do you know that, one of the wisest person said this, a good man leaves something for his children's children. And do you want to be that good man? But at the same time, this wise man also said that inheritance claimed too early will not be beneficial. And so you just want to find a way to be able to stagger this gifting. Now, what about in some families where you may have people who may be too old among your loved ones? It could be even yourself. If you look at this picture here, can you recognize who are in the picture? The last time I asked this in a workshop, someone said that, yeah, I know the lady. The lady stay just a few houses down the road. And I said, have you met the guy? And he said, yeah, the tour guide, Yang Ying. Yeah, so this is the story of Madam Chung and Yang Ying, the tour guide. It's a very sad thing, because if you know, and if I had to ask you right now, when do you think would be a person's most vulnerable moment? When do you think would be a most vulnerable moment? In Madam Chung's case, it is not, like when she slipped into mental incapacity or depression. It is firstly when her husband passed away. The person closest to her is not around. And as a result, she may be, feeling, depressed and so on. And then she may have aches and pains here and there. And here there is this boy who is so concerned over her and always appearing. So firstly, your loved one is not around. Secondly, you might slip into mental incapacity or depression. And this is a slow, it is a slow degeneration sometimes. And as a result, she just entrusts the money to the wrong, into the wrong hands. And instead of, feeding herself in her old age, it is taking care of somebody's holiday. And so that's the last thing we want. And third, you can see here, what about in some cases in a family, there are some of the people who are not financially savvy at all. And you can see in this example, 1 million is gone in just 1 year. And she did put down some of the money into insurance plans and so on, but eventually it was also encashed. And I come across the same. There was this lady whose husband has taken care of all the financial affairs. And when he suddenly passed on, she was completely lost because she is totally not savvy. And then she kept attending talks that her private banker asked her to go for. And because she's fearful that she just might make mistakes, and she's paranoid as a result of that. And that's also not how we want it to be as well for our loved ones. And number 4, what about, in families where you have people who may not be financially responsible? And do you know who he is? And do you know what he said? He told his daughter, just give me one last chance. The daughter was holding a piggy bank, and he said, just one last chance, give me all the money in your piggy bank. And when everything is well, I'll return it back to you. And it never happened because he would have gambled it all away. And what about in some families where we have children? These are not disabled, but they are differently able. They have different talents, different abilities. Some of them may be autistic. Some of them may have other developmental challenges. And so the question here is, do you love them as long as you live, or do you love them as long as they live? And would you take care of them as long as you live, or would you take care of them as long as they live? And what would be the best way to take care of them as long as they live when you are no longer around? So this is why we say that, if you have any of these 5 groups of people, there could be situations where that the trust can be structured to suit your family's objective, because every family is different. You don't need to have all 5 challenges. In many cases, it's just 1 or perhaps 2. And so what is the best way to illustrate a trust? I would use this, okay, let me change my background. Okay, I'm going to illustrate using this glass here. So imagine with me, like this glass here is like a trust that we are creating. And then you will have different assets. Like, for example, you would have a house, and you would have some insurance. So let's say Aviva or NTUC. And instead of giving everything at one go to your children, you can say, okay, I'm going to put it into a trust here, put my house inside, I put my insurance inside. I can even put my CPF nomination inside as well. And that also includes cash. I just put it all inside here. And so if I have a trust set up, then I would also have appointed a trustee, let's say a corporate trustee that's represented over here. And so the role of this trustee is to take care of all the trust assets inside. And you will see that what we have done is that we have appointed this person, this trustee, to be the legal owner. And here we have your beneficiaries. So this represents your beneficiaries. And so the role of the trustee is to be the legal owner. And this beneficiaries will be the beneficial owner. So in short, I have a legal owner taking care of all these assets for the benefit of the beneficial owner. And how would this trustee know what to do with the assets? Because I would also have some kind of like a letter of wishes. It's like an instruction manual. So you can see here, so this one says that how to use a mass keeper. So that's instruction manual. So that will guide the trustee in terms of how to do the management, be it how to invest, how to manage all the trust assets. And so this is exactly how that trust works. Okay, so basically we say that you will need a trust that is cost effective because the setup fee ranges from 5 to 8K with minimal admin fee required until activation. It is flexible because you can just make changes and amend it anytime as long as you are alive. And while you're alive, you have full control over the trust assets. And so if I were to show you in a different format, how a standby trust look like. So let's say this is Mr. and Mrs. Tan, and these are the children they have. So the first concern is mental incapacity, because what can be worse than that? And that is mental incapacity. And so in mental capacity, a will alone is not going to help because will only comes in upon demise. So I'll need to do an LPA, lasting power of attorney. And so in the LPA, I would have said that, okay, if this happens to me, then the assets I have will go into the trust and it will be used to take care of myself. And then at the same time, take care of my children as well. But if this event didn't happen and death happens, then I would have a will. And in the will, I will have poured the assets into the trust. And then there will be regular payout that's going to be given to my children with conditions attached and also withholding criteria. So this is a pictorial way of how that trust is going to look like, a 3-in-1, which stands for the will, the trust, and the LPA, the 3-in-1 documents. And so now we come to the third trap. So we talk about the first, that is, well, I don't even need a will. And the second is, I have a will, but is that going to be sufficient? And third is, a lot of people say this, I am worth more dead than alive. Do you hear this? Do you think that it is true that I am worth more dead than alive? Because many people think that, yeah, it is the case. I'm worth more dead than alive because when I die, my insurance money will kick in. When I die, then, all this like CPF will then become liquid and so on. So I'm worth more dead than alive. But here I'm going to show you the reverse, that in some cases, in some families, I'm not saying all, but in some families, there could be just leakages. And because of these leakages, your family might receive much lesser than what you have expected them to receive. And what are some of these leakages? They come in the form of taxes, professional fees, and creditors. And that is why, as a result of that, your family get much lesser. What do I mean by taxes? I remember about 6 years ago, I was working with a lady who's just 24. And she was having a difficult time because her father passed away suddenly at the age of 59. And it's like the father has assets, and that includes shares in US. And these shares, they were stuck. Even until today, it is still stuck because there is a 40% tax that is applicable. And before you can even get hold of the money, you have to pay this 40% first. And so if, let's say, if you have a portfolio of $1 million shares, and a lot of people have bought into US shares, and you buy into the US shares $1 million, I have to come out with 400,000 first before the rest can be liquidated. And do you know the same goes for UK properties as well? And so this is why there are leakages that people may not be aware of, because the assets that you use to grow your wealth might not be the best assets for the purpose of wealth transfer. There's also the professional fees. Basically, the more I have, the more I have to pay. And then the third is creditors. I'm going to touch a bit more on creditors in my next slide here. You can see that, without planning, my assets can shrink unexpectedly because of these three things. And we'll go through it one by one. The first, professional negligence. If today you are in a profession, like for example, doctors, lawyers, and society is becoming more and more litigious. Like in this case, the doctor is being sued for over $8 million. Yeah, a doctor may earn a lot of money, but it takes a long time and a lot of effort, to clear all the exams, to study and so on before earning the money. But do you know that just one lawsuit, the doctor could just lose that 8 million? And more recently, a doctor made bankrupt after failing to pay damages for liposuction death. This is a very sad case of what happens in an accident in a Bugis junction, whereby you would know that the Ferrari driver drove at high speed, and as a result of that, it crashed into a taxi. And the taxi was ferrying a Japanese passenger, and everybody died. But what happened was that the parents of the Japanese passenger, the parents of this Japanese lady, actually sued the Ferrari driver Machi's estate. At that point in time, Machi's wife was pregnant with a second child, and Machi's estate is worth more than 8 million. And because it was proven that Machi was negligent, the Machi's family received much lesser than what could be due to them, because they will have to pay the parents of that Japanese passenger. And so this is an example of contingent liability. When I'm proven negligent, I may have to pay even if I pass on. And so more recently, you can see that court awards 1.14 million in damages to family of victim in a fatal road accident. And the third area where my assets can just diminish, or half of it can be gone. Sometimes we ask people, what is the fastest way for a person to lose half of whatever that is accumulated? And the answer is divorce. And this can happen to many people, including in this case Bill Gates and a wife. And this is often one of the concerns that a lot of our clients with older children, some of them, they come to me and say, Kee, I'm not so worried about my marriage. We are not so worried about our marriage, but what we are concerned with is our children's marriage, because we don't know how it will be these days. Because her concern, the mother's concern, is that if I die and I'm gonna leave everything to my son, and then what happened if my son get married and then eventually my son divorced, and then wouldn't half of everything I have, half of everything my son has goes to the wife? And that can include property as well. So the last thing the parents want is that, to leave behind a landed property, let's say, in the name of the son, and then the wife moved in and everything, and then half of the property gone as a result of the divorce. And so this is why it is so important to plan, because without planning, my assets can shrink unexpectedly. But with planning, there is a way to protect it, because there is a way to create a firewall here so that whatever that you have intended for your family here can be safeguarded. And this is what we call a creditor protection trust. It is completely different from the earlier trust we talked about, which is a standby trust. So this is just to give you an idea of how it works. And so in conclusion, we say here that leaving an inheritance is very much by default. However, leaving a heritage is very much by design. If you do not design and if you do not do planning in a deliberate, intentional, and purposeful manner, it might just result in the 3 C's: cost, conflict, and confusion for your loved ones. And if you take a very casual approach to estate planning, it might just result in many casualties. And so with this, I've come to the end of my sharing. Thank you very much, and God bless. Back to you, Jessie. Thank you.
Thank you, Kee. That is some profound sharing you got there. I hope everyone has captured the lessons. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the Q&A box. We will address it later at the Q&A session. So in summary, Kee has touched on 3 main threads, and the lessons that we can learn from it are: number 1, leaving your will de facto to the intestate law might seem ideal, but in fact, you're leaving your angles uncovered and your estate exposed to variables that could have been avoided. Number 2, having a simple will may not necessarily be sufficient. As shared, a simple will is a one-way instrument, regardless of the situations of our beneficiaries. We need to think further. Are they too young? Is it too soon? Or are they too unprepared? And if so, perhaps a trust or a detailed will with conditions might suit better. Last but not least, a casual approach to your inheritance may result in many unexpected casualties. So plan with caution and with a values-driven approach in mind.
That's right, Jessie. I also particularly like this quote from Warren Buffett, and he shared that this: I want to leave them enough to do something, but I don't want to leave them too much that they do nothing. I think that's very profound of Warren Buffett. I also like one of her sharing about this 80-year-old Akong grandfather who wanted to pass down these 3 D's values to his grandson, right? Desire, determination, and delayed gratification. But then yet the grandson's attitude is, why do I need to learn all this? My father is rich. Oh my God. I guess wealth could really ruin the next generation if we do not attach values to it.
Yes, that's right, Derek. I very much agree with you. Well, in fact, there are many other things to pass on other than material goods. For example, your very own values, life lesson, philosophy are the very capital that you should focus on passing down to your future generations. In lay terms, you can also call these intangible assets or human capital. If we only have money to pass on, we are truly very poor indeed. There's a well-known quote that I'm sure that everyone knows of: give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. The end goal is simple. We want to take care of our future generation to prosper and to be well taken care of. You may have a multi-million-dollar asset through your years of hard work, but if you only hand down the dollars and cents without values and teaching, chances are your beneficiaries are taken care of for some time, but not prosper in generations because they potentially squander without the intention of sowing it for the future generations. That is why we advocate for a values-driven approach here to impact your future generations with better values and wealth inheritance.
I know now some of you may ask, it's easy to talk, but can we walk the talk? Well, of course you can. We have seen successful people such as one of Singapore's forefather, Tan Kim Seng, people like Alfred Nobel, leading to the Nobel Prize, and even the prime supermarket Tan's family doing all that. All of them focus on using their inheritance to build people and society. And the results, success and progress through generations and generations, all the way till today. You can go to our website, www.heritance.org, for more success stories and exemplars to learn from and be inspired. On this note, we have also prepared a short video clip of our interview with Ms. Deirdre Goh. She's a power woman with an extensive corporate career, ranging from the finance industry to entertainment and events management. and she currently heads her family business at TCB Private Limited, a real estate company started by her grandfather in the 1950s. She talks about how her grandfather has solid values and how he integrated these values into their family business, paving the way for the younger generations to prepare for prosperity and growth, taking care of everyone within the family. Let's watch the videos together.
I think number one is family is key. Whatever he does for the family. It is so that his family can prosper. I suppose in those days can be safe, secure. You're talking about post-war. And then looking further down the line, he just wants all the succeeding generations to have a better life. Because my grandfather actually started from very humble beginnings himself. So that was the first thing in my mind, that the whole purpose of this company is to take care of the family. It's not to kind of be the best in this or the biggest in that. I think that was the most important point. And from there, looking at the Constitution, I also noticed how he was concerned about legacy. Part and parcel of what he used to do was to take care of the community, of the larger community. Starting from where he used to live, the war house used to be in Pasir Panjang, and he did a lot, for the villages around Pasir Panjang. Extending outside of that, for all his children who went to various schools, he would donate to those schools. He would help them to build halls and sports grounds. And so you get the flavor, right? That one of the purposes is to do good. We want to prosper too. We want to take care of people financially. The third very key thing was the importance placed on education. This was something that my grandfather really, really believed in. During his time, he was not able to receive a very high level of education. So he was a bit of a self-taught, but he really understood the value of education. It's quite unusual for his days to make sure that his girls were educated as well. And you must try and remember that in those days, there was still that, the girls should be going to finishing school and then married off, sort of thing. But no, he made sure that all my aunts were educated all the way to the highest level. I think there is an emphasis on education, and I think he wanted that legacy to carry on as well. You could say that what I gleaned from all of that is the purpose of our company really is to take care of the family, to ensure that there is resourcing so that the families of families, in succeeding generation will have the ability to not only have a decent life, a decent standard of living, but that they will always be able to resource their children to make sure that they're all educated as well. And at the same time, as a company, we can continue to make a positive impact in the community that we are in. That's really important to me, to make sure that succeeding generations understand this key purpose. It has to be the starting point. So that's why I think family should be involved in the business. Their input is important because in a way the culture is driven by our family ethos, But don't mistake that for having family to run the business though. Because when your business grows and you might diversify into different things, of course we look for opportunities, right? You will have to work with people who are experts in that area, experienced in that area, or who could take us to places that we want to go. And they don't necessarily need to come from the family if we don't have those talents in-house. So the family involvement part is really to make sure we stay true to purpose. But where the actual business activity side, where the family can contribute, perfect, right? Because that just simply dovetails. But where the talents that are required or the skills that are required has to come from outside, then of course we will be doing that, expanding our staff strength and bringing on board the right people. It's quite surprising and amazing that my grandfather actually made a lot of changes to it to really reflect how he envisioned the company to be going forward. So it's not just get one off the shelf thing from Accra, and use it. So I think that also emphasize how important he thinks it is. From here, though, going forward, we are going to need to create a family constitution. So we've decided to embark on, we've already set up our family office. And the next part of the exercise that we'll be going through is to set up a framework of governance so that we can encapsulate, the values that we want to pass on in a framework that works, for succeeding generations, right? And it's relevant to them. World changes so quick, right? So we have to also make sure that it remains relevant to succeeding generations as well.
Wow, would you look at that? Bear in mind that Miss Goh has never met her grandfather, and yet she has captured the family ethos and her grandfather's values perfectly. Beyond that, she strongly relates and applies to her family's business and family values together. The guiding principles of her grandfather were simple: to provide resources for all succeeding generations. From there, they branch out to a bigger purpose, and that is to do good. I genuinely admire Ms. Goh's strong knitted family, which is displayed through their business success and their strong belief in their family values. We played this video to emphasize the importance of values beyond valuables. When values are well established, wealth success comes naturally. Don't misunderstand to think that you can only do this if you have a business. In fact, everyone can do it. Above just business, we want everyone to consider family harmony and personal excellence. In fact, Ms. Goh's family started from humble beginnings themselves. We all start somewhere. Why not start with you? Start today and share this with your family. We have more of these case studies and guides on our website. And if you'd like to see the full interview, you can head over to www.heritance.org to read more. Now we have come to the end and we have come to the time of the Q&A. Let's take a look at some of the questions asked today.
That's right. We have several questions posted in the Q&A chat box. So you all can also post subsequent questions you have. The first question came from Ilya Tan. If I have a will and want to do a trust, do I need to rewrite my will? So maybe Kee, you can unmute yourself and just share the answer to benefit everyone.
Yeah, sure. If you're looking at a standby trust, Ilya, then yes, you will need to rewrite the will because you will need to link the will to the trust because usually what happens is that in the will, it will make mention that, okay, I'm going to pour my assets into the trust. So this is how your trust gets funded. Because if you don't link the will and the trust, if they are not talking, then you're not going to have anything going to the trust. So even if you have done a trust with all the wishes and so on, there is no money and no assets going in. That will also be meaningless. So the answer is yes. You will need to rewrite your will.
All right, thank you very much. I hope Kee has answered your question. And we have another question from Kiefer. He gave us a situation. I'm single and in my early 20s. How relevant is writing a will to me at this point?
Well, I think, thank you, Kiefer, for the question. I think many times we feel that, oh, because I am young, so nothing will happen to me. But we cannot be too presumptuous as well because, there's a saying that is nothing as certain as the certainty of death, but there is nothing as uncertain as the timing and moments at which death occur. So it doesn't mean that I'm young, nothing will happen. So if indeed, something happened, we want to be prepared for the worst. So if that happens, then you say, oh, but if I don't really have much assets, if you don't have much, then of course there is not so much to plan. But if you have something that you want to leave behind, and you want to leave behind, let's say for your parents or for your siblings, then it is best for you to put down in a will. Even if your wishes is same as the Intestate Succession Act, assuming you want to give the same group of people, it is still best to write because that will just save you some money. Because if you don't have a will, then there is a need to appoint an administrator. So this will actually cost more money as compared to if you have a will and there will be an executor appointed already. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Kee. I think that helps. And I think it's related to another question we have from Ilya. Is there a minimum assets to have before we set up a trust? Because I suppose young people may think that they have little to have. So maybe you can answer this question.
Yeah, so I would say that everybody needs a will generally. It's just like a will is like a house, everybody needs a roof over them. As a trust, I would liken it to be like a car. Some people will need it, definitely need it. Some people might not. So is there a minimum asset to have before we set up the trust? I would say generally as a guide, maybe you're looking at somewhere like a 3 million upwards. And by that, I would mean that all the various assets, which includes property, all the properties you have, CPF money, investment, and not to forget your insurance as well. Because today when you're alive, you might not see it coming in, but upon your demise, that can actually be worth quite a fair bit.
Yes, I have a question coming in that asks this. Does heritance also allows me to write a will? Since we are talking about a company, right? So yeah, so maybe one of the panelists, or Jessie, you have to help answer this question.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if you have followed through our social media and our website, Heritance Digital is a mobile first app that allows you more than just writing a will. I mean, of course, you can write a will inside. You can include your assets, your beneficiaries, your bequests, and on top of that, you can also upload memories. You know, think of this as an app that brings your family together, a private social media between your families and even your closest friends, and in fact leave time capsules. Just want to share with you, not too long ago we have met someone who actually shared that he have wanted to leave some letters to his son, and he wishes that he could have had this app back then to do it for his son when he had a situation. So you can do that for our app.
Wow. Okay. Sounds like we are all waiting for Heritance app to be ready. Anybody, any more questions that you can type into the chat box, the chat or the Q&A function here in this webinar, or you can raise your hand and we can also answer your question live. Anyone? Don't be shy. We have Kee today. I think she's the best person to answer all your questions you have about estate planning or inheritance planning. Anyone else?
All right. Okay. If not, thank you very much for joining us today. This marks the end of our webinar. Once again, Heritance Digital is a digital company with the mission of impacting generations through better values and wealth inheritance.
Yeah, before we end, maybe just a bit of updating you guys of the company. The app is currently in progress, built to perfection, and we are excited to announce that the beta version is on track for release in the App Store next month. We also have a Chinese New Year giveaway trivial quiz next month in line with this launch. And do follow our socials and subscribe to our mailing list to stay updated and stand a chance to win $88 cash e-ang pao. And if you are interested to find out more about trust or wills or inheritance planning, do feel free to connect with Kee. I believe she's definitely the best person to help you with any queries you may have, and her contact information are on the slide. And finally, we want to hear your feedback for today's webinar so that we can continue to improve and provide exciting updates and relevant content to you in your inheritance planning journey.
That's right. So we have come close to today's webinar. Do visit us at our website at www.heritance.org and follow and like our social media. Once again, thank you for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you at future events. Goodbye, and here's to wishing you and your family an early,
prosperous Chinese New Year. Bye.